June 30th, 1971. A Soviet recovery helicopter races across the steppe. Below them, a Soyuz space capsule, scorched from its fiery re-entry through Earth's atmosphere, has made a perfect, gentle landing. The recovery team is ecstatic. They have been listening to the descent, and everything was nominal. Inside that capsule are three heroes: Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev. These men are not just cosmonauts, they are pioneers. They have just spent 23 days in orbit, shattering every space endurance record. They have successfully crewed the world's first-ever space station. A technician knocks on the side of the hatch. There is no response. They try again. Silence. With a growing sense of dread, they force the hatch open. Inside, the three cosmonauts are sitting peacefully in their chairs, seemingly unharmed. There is no fire, no structural damage, but there are dark blue patches on their faces and a trickle of blood from Commander Dobrovolsky's ear. They are all dead. This is the story of Salyut 1, a mission that represented one of the Soviet Union's greatest triumphs in the space race, a technological marvel that opened a new chapter in human history. But it is also the story of how that monumental achievement led directly to the single deadliest accident in the history of space exploration. A tragedy so swift and so silent, it still haunts the void today. To understand the desperate gamble of Salyut 1, you have to go back to 1969. On July 20th, the United States planted its flag on the moon. For the Soviet Union, which had dominated the early years of the space race with Sputnik and Yuri Gagarin, this was a crushing, globally televised defeat. The race to the moon was over, and they had lost. But the Cold War demanded a response. The Soviets needed a new goal, a new space first that America couldn't match. They decided to pivot. While the Apollo program was built around short, glorious dashes to the moon, the Soviets would play the long game. They would master living and working in space for extended periods. They would build the first permanent human outpost in orbit. They would build a space station, born from the ashes of their failed moon program and partly cannibalizing a top-secret military spy station project called Almaz. The Salyut program was pushed forward with incredible speed and secrecy. The station itself, named Salyut 1, or Salyut, was revolutionary. It was a single 20-ton module, about the size of a small mobile home. By today's standards, it was primitive and cramped. But in 1971, it was a castle in the sky. It had designated zones for working and living, a docking port for incoming Soyuz spacecraft, and even a large solar telescope, the first of its kind to be operated by humans in orbit. On April 19, 1971, it was launched unmanned on a powerful proton rocket. The world's first home in the void was now open for business. Just 3 days after the station's launch, the Soviets sent up the first crew on the Soyuz 10 mission. They successfully rendezvoused with Salyut 1, a difficult orbital maneuver. The world watched, expecting a triumphant televised tour of the new station. But as the Soyuz spacecraft moved in for the final docking, disaster struck. The crew achieved a soft dock, but the final, crucial hard dock mechanism, which would create an airtight seal, failed. For 5.5 agonizing hours, they tried everything to latch on securely. But it was no use. They couldn't open the hatch. They were staring at their new home through a porthole, but they couldn't get in. Defeated, they were forced to return to Earth. To add insult to injury, their own spacecraft malfunctioned during re-entry, filling their cabin with toxic fumes and knocking the commander unconscious. They barely made it back alive. The first attempt was a humiliating and nearly fatal failure. But the Soviets were relentless. 6 weeks later, on June 6, 1971, they launched Soyuz 11. On board were 3 cosmonauts: Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev. In a tragic twist of fate, they were the backup crew. The original crew had been grounded at the last minute because one of them was suspected of having tuberculosis. These 3 men were not supposed to be on this historic flight. This time, the docking was flawless. On June 7th, Viktor Patsayev floated through the hatch, and the era of space stations had truly begun. For the next 23 days, the crew of Soyuz 11 captivated their nation and the world. They conducted a battery of scientific experiments, studied the Earth's atmosphere, and became the first humans to operate a telescope in space. They even appeared on Soviet television, giving proud tours of their orbital home, exercising on a treadmill, and playing chess. They were national heroes, proving that humanity could not just visit space, but live there. Their mission was a stunning success, a clear victory that put the Soviet Union back on top. On June 29th, after 23 days in orbit, the crew packed up their experiments, said goodbye to Salyut 1, and entered their Soyuz 11 capsule for the journey home. The undocking was perfect. The retro fire burn to begin their descent was perfect. The final radio communications from Commander Dobrovolsky were calm, professional, and cheerful. The ground controllers wished them a soft landing. Volkov replied, "Thank you, be seeing you. We're starting the orientation." Everything was nominal. Then, at an altitude of 104 miles, as the orbital module was scheduled to separate from the crew's descent module, something went terribly wrong. The separation was triggered by a series of explosive bolts. They were designed to fire sequentially to minimize the shock, but instead, they fired simultaneously. The violent jolt popped open a critical pressure equalization valve, a seal no bigger than a thumbnail. This valve was essential for a safe landing. It was designed to open at a low altitude of about 2.5 miles, to slowly equalize the capsule's internal air pressure with the outside atmosphere. Instead, it had been forced open in the absolute vacuum of space. In an instant, all the breathable air in their capsule began to vent into the void. The onboard recorders later revealed the faint, terrifying hiss of escaping air. The cosmonauts had less than a minute. In the cramped, chaotic cabin, they had no way of knowing which of the 2 valves had failed, and no time to seal it. Within seconds, the catastrophic drop in pressure caused the oxygen in their blood to boil. They suffered fatal embolisms, brain hemorrhages, and cardiac arrest. It was a swift, silent, and horrifying end. We returned to the plains of Kazakhstan, to the recovery team, looking into the capsule at their 3 fallen heroes. They had died just minutes after their last cheerful transmission. Their automated systems had landed their capsule perfectly, a ghost ship returning from the heavens with its dead crew. The Soyuz 11 tragedy was a national trauma for the Soviet Union and a profound shock to the entire world. It remains the only human fatality to have ever occurred in space itself, above the 100-kilometer Kármán line. The legacy of the disaster was immediate and profound. The Soyuz spacecraft was completely redesigned, and a critical safety rule was reinstated. All crews, from that day forward, would be required to wear pressurized spacesuits during launch, docking, and landing. This rule had been abandoned on the Soyuz missions to cram a 3rd cosmonaut into the cabin. The 3 men of Soyuz 11 had paid the ultimate price for that decision. And what of Salyut 1? After the disaster, it was never visited again. It became a ghost ship itself, an empty monument to both triumph and tragedy. On October 11, 1971, after 175 days in orbit, Mission Control fired its thrusters one last time, sending the world's first space station into a controlled dive. It burned up in a silent, fiery streak over the Pacific Ocean. The story of Salyut 1 is a brutal reminder that every great leap in exploration is paid for with immense courage and, sometimes, with unthinkable sacrifice. It proved that humanity's future lay in the stars, but it also served as a permanent, chilling warning about the razor-thin margin that separates victory from disaster in the silent darkness of space. If you were captivated by the story of this early space station, you must learn about Skylab, America's first space station, and the dramatic mission to save it after a disastrous launch.